In this movie, we'll make all the squares match the letters so that they have both strokes and beveled edges. And while this doesn't really have anything to do with alignment per se, it is a really cool technique, and it is going to throw off the alignment of our artboard, although we'll fix that problem before the movie is out. All right, I'll go ahead and switch over to my document so far, and notice that all of the squares are relegated to their own layer here inside the Layers panel, and so to select them all, I'll just click in the upper right corner of that layer. Then I'll go up to the line weight option and increase it to 3 points, and that should automatically set the stroke to black. But if you were to shift-click on that stroke swatch in order to bring up the RGB values, and incidentally, if you don't see RGB, then just go ahead and choose RGB from the flyout menu. It's very possible that you're going to see something other than 0, which is to say you're going to end up with a weak black. And if that's the case, then just go ahead and click on that swatch instead of shift-clicking and select the black swatch up here at the top of the list, which, if I were to now shift-click, as you can see, gets a 0 for the RGB values. All right, we also want to align the strokes to the inside of the path outlines, and you can do that by clicking on the word stroke and then selecting the second align stroke icon, this guy right there, and that'll shift those guys inward. All right, now we need to create the beveled edges, and the best way to do that is to go ahead and zoom in on, let's say, this top left square. I'll click off the squares to deselect all of them, and I'll click on this guy once again so I'm selecting him independently of the other squares. Then I'll press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac to copy the square, and I'll press Control-F or Command-F on the Mac in order to paste a copy of the square in front. And I can tell it's there by moving it. Of course, I don't want to move it, so I'll just press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that change. And then I'll change the stroke to none, and I'll go ahead and click on this first fill swatch right there and change it to black. And this black square, by the way, is going to represent the beveled edge. But we need to make a couple of changes. First, because the black arrow tool is selected, press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to bring up the Move dialog box. And we want to change both the horizontal and vertical values to 8 points in this case. And what we're doing is basically determining the size of that beveled edge. At which point, go ahead and click the Copy button in order to create a copy of that black square. Then shift-click on the original so that they're both selected. And let's combine them by going up to the window menu and choosing the Pathfinder command to bring up the Pathfinder panel, after which point you just want to click the first icon in the first row to unite those two shapes into one path outline, after which point you can hide the Pathfinder panel. Now what we want to do is smooth off this edge right there as well as the one down left. And you can do that using the Pen tool. So go ahead and select the Pen tool, which you can get by pressing the P key, and then hover your cursor over this anchor point right there, at which point you should see a minus next to the Pen tool cursor. Then click in order to get rid of that point. And Illustrator will go ahead and draw a new segment between the remaining anchor points. Then click on this anchor point right there to get rid of it as well. And now we have a nicely tapered edge. Okay, now you want to press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool. Click on the shape to select the entire thing and right-click on it and then choose Arrange and choose Send to Back, or you can press Control-Shift left bracket or Command-Shift left bracket on the Mac. All right, now we need to duplicate this guy a bunch of times. So go ahead and zoom out and then drag this guy by his top left anchor point until it snaps into alignment with its neighbor, at which point just go ahead and release your mouse button. You don't need to press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, even though we do ultimately want to make a copy. All I'm doing right now is trying to figure out what the distance of this move is. And I can determine that by pressing the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to bring up the Move dialog box, which will replay the last movement. And so that tells me that I just moved that beveled edge 180 points to the right. And so with that information in mind, I'll just cancel out and then I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that move. And I'll go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose Transform in order to bring up the dynamic transform effect. And now I'm going to change that horizontal move value to 180, just as I saw a moment ago. I'm going to leave the vertical value alone. I'm going to turn on the preview checkbox just to confirm that everything's working out the way it should. And then I'll click in the copies value and press the up arrow key until I fill out that first row. And as you can see, a copies value of 3 does the trick. after which point I'll click OK, and then I'll go up to the Effect menu and choose the second instance of transform, the one that ends ... in order to apply another instance of this effect. At which point Illustrator will bark at me. I'll just go ahead and click Apply New Effect because I do indeed want one. But this time I'm going to swap these values. I'm going to change the horizontal value to 0, and I'm going to take the vertical value up to 180. Turn on the preview checkbox to make sure things are working out the way they should. And because Illustrator remembered my copies value of 3, I have filled out the entire artwork. And so having done that, I'll just go ahead and click OK to accept that change. All right, now as you can see, the extruded edges are encroaching upon the right and bottom edges of the artboard. So I'll go ahead and switch to the artboard tool by selecting it or pressing Shift-O. And then I'll go up here to the control panel. I'll select the top right reference point because I don't want the top right corner of the artboard to move. And then I'll just go ahead and add +8 to the width value and do the same for the height value as well. Just enter +8 for that, and that will take both the width and height up to 748 points. And the reason I'm adding 8 is because that is the size of those extruded edges. After which point I'll press the Escape key to exit the artboard mode. All right, and just one more thing here. I want to add a gray background. And so I'm going to click off my path to deselect it. And then notice the document setup button right there. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to give this document a 12-point bleed, just so I can go all the way to the edge of my artboard. And now I'll just zoom out a little bit, and I'll create a new layer below the checkers layer using that keyboard shortcut of Control-Alt-L or Command-Option-L on the Mac. And notice the new layer is now at the bottom of the stack. I'll call this layer back because it's going to be a kind of background, and I'll change the color to violet, then click OK. And then finally, I'll select my rectangle tool. I'll go ahead and draw a square that's as big as the bleed. And I will change the color of this square from black to this guy right here, Whetstone, which I've created in advance. And then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to hide that panel. And I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out. And that, friends, is how you add extruded edges to your squares, beginning with a simple move function, followed up by a couple of dynamic transform effects here inside Illustrator.